The simplest pathway has been depicted in a light brown color and the Epoplast pathway in a dark brown color. So the movement of molecules between the cells actually creates a lot of pressure differences between the 2 points. So the epidermis is made up of the barrel-shaped cells called as the epidermal cells. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to another session on chapter 11, that is Transport in Plants. I'm Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about the water potential and the solute potential. And we also learnt about a process called as osmosis, which is used by the plants to take in water. And we know that osmosis is nothing but the movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. And osmosis is one such event which is very important that occurs in the topic that we are studying in this particular session. And apart from that, in the previous session, and we also learnt about plasmolysis, and also we learnt about what happens to the cells when placed in a isotonic, hypertonic and a hypotonic solution. In today's session, we shall completely concentrate on how the water molecules move within the root cells. There are two important pathways that help them in doing so. We shall study about them. So we shall see how the long distance transport of water occurs. So water and minerals as well as food, they are generally moved through the plant cells by a mass flow or a bulk flow process. And this mass flow or bulk flow, we shall discuss about it in detail in the coming sessions. And we all know that plants, in order to survive, they require water. But from where will they take in water? Will the leaves absorb water and that water will be utilized by the plant? No. It is the water that is present in the ground region or the soil that will be absorbed by the roots, and it will be transported to different parts or the upper parts of the plant. So in the roots, there are different cells that are present through which the water molecules actually travel. So the mass flow is nothing but the movement of substances in bulk. So when I say substances, it means the water will mix with all the mineral content that is present in the soil. Therefore, it forms a solute or a substance. So the substances, they move from one point to another as a result of pressure difference. So the movement of molecules between the cells actually creates a lot of pressure differences between the 2 points. So pressure differences between the 2 points means from the root up till to the other regions of the plant where the water travels, a lot of pressure is being created, and this pressure actually helps in the movement of water to the upper parts of the plant, which is nothing but called as the root pressure and the transpiration pull pressure. So all that we shall study in the coming sessions. And this bulk flow is usually achieved by a positive hydrostatic pressure gradient or a negative hydrostatic pressure gradient. And the bulk movement of substances through the conducting tissue, which is nothing but the vascular tissue, that is the xylem, is called as translocation. So the movement of substances through the conducting tissue is called as translocation. Here the substances are translocated. They are carried from one region to a different region or different part of a plant body, and that process is nothing but called as translocation. So to understand the translocation or the movement of substances to different regions of the plant body, we need to know how exactly the plant absorbs water. So here the roots, they absorb most of the water, and it is from the roots the water goes into the plants, and therefore it is important for us to water the roots and not the leaves. Why? Because it will not be the leaves that will absorb the water. So the water will not be absorbed by the leaves, but it will be absorbed by the roots, wherein the roots go deep into the soil, and whenever the moisture availability is there, they will absorb the moisture. And the water is absorbed along with the mineral nutrients. Why? Because in the soil, the various minerals are also present in the soil. These mixes with that of the water, and therefore it will be absorbed in the form of a solute by the root hair, and that process is completely known as diffusion. So what is diffusion? If you remember, if you have watched the previous session, you would know that diffusion is nothing but it is the movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration to that of a lower concentration. A region of higher concentration is the soil which is filled abundant with lot of minerals, nutrients and also water, and this solute will be transported from that particular region of higher concentration to the root hairs where the concentration of the solute was less, or the water molecules was less. So therefore that process is nothing but called as diffusion. And once water is absorbed by the root hairs, it moves deeper into the roots. So it has to move into the roots, right? So moving into the root means it has to move to the other parts of the roots, such as the epidermis, then the cortex, then the endodermis, the pericycle, and then into the vascular bundle, right? So therefore, this movement of water from the root hairs into the other cells of the root take place by two important pathways. One is called as the Epoplast Pathway and the other one is called as the Symplast Pathway. So we shall discuss how exactly the water molecules moves through the Epoplast Pathway and the Symplast Pathway. So talking about the Epoplast and the Symplast pathway, it is actually the process or the path through which the water molecules move. So in order to understand this, first we should know the structure of the roots. So the roots externally, they are covered by the root hair, right? First, it will have the epidermis. On the epidermis are present the root hairs. So the water first it will be absorbed by the root hair, then it will enter into the epidermis, then it will move to a region just below the epidermis, that is the cortex. So the epidermis is made up of the barrel shaped cells called as the epidermal cells, and the cortex is made up of parenchymatous cells. Then below the cortex is present a layer of cells which is called as the endodermis, which is also made up of barrel-shaped parenchymatous cells. And inner to the endodermis is present a layer called as the pericycle, and below the pericycle is present the pith region, and which is parenchymatous, and it is in the pith region that is the vascular bundles are present, and especially we will concentrate on xylem because we are talking about the movement of the water, and xylem is the water conducting tissue, or the vascular bundle that conducts water is nothing but the xylem. So here, so this part, structure of the root is explained in detail in the anatomy of the flowering plants. So here, what they have done is they have given us a magnified view of different cells of the root. Numerous cells will be present. So they have given a magnified view of each of the cell to understand exactly how the water molecules move through a epiplast and a symplast pathway. So if you see here, the symplast pathway has been depicted in a light brown color and the epiplast pathway in a dark brown color. So we shall see the movement of water molecules in two of these pathways. So here, when we talk about the epiplast pathway, the movement of water molecules between the cells, that is, the water molecule first it will enter into the root hair. After it enters into the root hair, it will enter into the epidermal cells. After it enters the epidermal cells, it has to move to the cortex. After the cortex, it has to move into the endodermis. Then it has to move into the pericycle. Then it has to move into the pith. And then from the pith, it has to enter into the xylem, right? So here, this is what actually the movement of the water molecule is. If it is specifically a symplast pathway, for first we'll discuss about epiplast pathway. If it is a Epoplast pathway, the water molecules, that is through the cell wall. So when they are moving through the cell wall, first the water molecules will be absorbed by the root hairs that are present on the epidermis. So the water molecules will be absorbed and it will travel through the cell wall, because we are talking about Epoplast pathway here. It will travel through the cell wall. It will travel through the cell wall of the cortex, that is the parenchyma cells present in the cortex. Then it will enter into the endodermis. So in the endodermis, in some of the plants, there is presence of Casparian strip. So if the Casparian strip is present, what happens? The water molecules cannot pass through the Casparian strip. Why? Because the Casparian strip that are present in the endodermis contains suberin deposition. And this suberin is impermeable to water. That is, it will not allow the water molecules to pass through them. So that is why once they reach the Casparian strip, what happens? A lot of tension gets created in the water molecules, and the water molecules that was moving through the cell wall, it will directly enter into the cytoplasm. Then it has to move to the pericycle and then to the xylem element, right? Therefore, because of this reason, Epoplast pathway is not that efficient. Therefore, most of the plants depend on the Symplast pathway. So in Symplast pathway, what happens? Here also, the water molecules or the solute, they are directly absorbed by the plasma membrane of the root cells, root hair cells. Then they travel root hair and then they travel into the epidermis. From the epidermis, they have to pass through the plasma membrane. Here, it depends on a procedure called as osmosis. So what is osmosis? The movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration to the region of the lower concentration through a selectively permeable membrane. Here, the plasma membrane is selectively permeable. They have plasmodesmatal connections or channels which actually allow. So now here the water molecules is higher concentration. So from the region of higher concentration, it has to move to the region of lower concentration, and it will move through a process called as osmosis, wherein it will travel through the plasmodesmatal connections between the cells. So here it will enter into the cytoplasm of the parenchyma cells, or it will enter into the cortex, and then through this it will enter into the endodermis, and then it will enter into the pericycle. Because it travels through the plasma membrane has plasmodesmatal connections which actually carries the molecules through that particular channels. So therefore, the presence or absence of Casparian strips will not matter there. It will enter into the pericycle and then it will enter into the xylem, and from the xylem the upward movement of water will occur, wherein the xylem will carry the water different parts of the plant body, upper parts of the plant body, and here for this particular upward movement of water, root pressure and transpiration pull will be applied, which you will study in the coming session. So this is about the Epoplast and the Symplast pathway. For easy understanding, in the textbook they have given one more diagram like this, wherein they have shown the cells of the root, wherein they have shown the symplastic and epiplastic pathways of water and ion absorption by the root hair and the movement in the root. So here you can see the root hairs. So these are the root hair. And this is the outermost layer that is there. These few of the epidermal cells themselves, they get converted into root hairs. So these are the epidermal cells. Epidermal cells, that is the epidermis. Epidermal cells together forms the epidermis tissue. So here when talking about epiplastic pathway, here the water molecules, they move through the cell membrane. So they move through the cell membrane like this. Once they reach the endodermis, they will have to pass through the Casparian strip. So those cell membranes having suberin depositions are nothing but the Casparian strips. the cell membrane of the endodermis has suberin deposition, and therefore suberin will not allow the water molecules to move further because they are impermeable to water molecules. So that is why it will create a lot of tension in the water molecules, which is not favorable to the plants. That is why plants prefer the symplastic pathway of the water movement. So here what happens in the symplastic pathway is, or symplastic path, the water molecules travels from a region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. Here, root hairs will absorb the water molecules. Now, this is the region of higher concentration and the epidermis is the region of the lower concentration. So, it has to move through from the root hair to the epidermis through the plasma membrane. How will it move? Through plasmodesmatal connections that are present. So, from the plasmodesmatal connections, they will move through the plasma membrane, and since they are traveling through the plasma membrane, they don't have to pass through the cell wall here. So, therefore, they directly enter the endodermis, they pass through the pericycle, and then they enter into the xylem, which is the water conducting tissue, and this xylem will actually transport the water to other upper parts of the plant. So, to the upper parts, it will be transferred by root pressure and transpiration pull. So, this is how the epoplast and the symplast pathway actually occurs. So, I hope you understood the session well, wherein we discussed about two important pathways for the movement of water molecules through different regions of the root or different cells of the root, that is the epoplast pathway and the symplast pathway. So, since you have understood now the epoplast pathway and the symplast pathway, that is about the movement of the water molecules. So, now according to our teaching, the movement of water molecules has reached the xylem. Now, from the xylem, it has to move towards the upper parts of the plant. And for the movement of upper parts of the plant, it should require a pressure, which is nothing but the root pressure and the transpiration pull. That is the cohesion, tension, transpiration pull. So, all that we shall study in the coming session. So, we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.